Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to start a new playlist in the channel which is called the UiPath Selectors. So let us see the agenda for this video. In this video we are going to see what exactly are selectors in UiPath Studio and why they are important. Post that we are going to see how the selectors are made, what are tags and attributes in a selector, what is the difference between a reliable and a not reliable selector, and how can we differentiate and how can we mitigate the risk of getting the element not identified by UiPath Studio in case the selector is not reliable, and all of this by a step-by-step demonstration in UiPath Studio. So let's get started. Okay, so let us see what exactly are selectors before directly jumping to the definition of selectors and looking the selectors in the UiPath Studio. We all know that how a postman is able to deliver a letter to your address. So a postman has more than 10, 100, 50, 1000 letters, and each letter is correctly delivered to the correct home. How? Because the address, there is an address that is associated with the packet or the letters. So the address has country, state, city, street, and then the house number. So the postman navigates from the country India to the state Maharashtra to city Navi Mumbai, then to the street, and then to the house number. That's how the postman is able to deliver the correct packet to the correct address. Now just think of same thing as a UiPath Studio. How UiPath Studio will be able to interact with the correct element. So for example, if I am doing any automation and I have a element on the screen, or for that matter let's say a web page on the screen, now how would UiPath know that where I have to click or where I have to write? So we should have the complete address where exactly the operation has to take place. So that's where selectors come in picture. Now if I go to the definition of selectors, so let us see what selector according to UiPath Studio is. So selectors are generated automatically every time we use an activity that interacts with the GUI. So what does that mean? So assuming that you are working on any automation and you have to click, you have to select an item from the drop down, or you have to check, uncheck. So all of these are the activity where we are interacting with the GUI and we are not doing anything on the background. Here we are directly interacting with the UI. That means that we have to click on some place, we have to select the drop down from some place. That is where the selectors come in picture, and whenever we use such activity in UiPath Studio, the selectors are automatically generated. We will see that in an action in a moment, right? So what exactly a selector is? A selector in UiPath Studio is a feature that enables the identification of the user interface elements to the address and the attributes stored in the XML fragments. So the same way the postman is able to deliver the address, deliver the packet to the correct home with the help of the address. Similarly, in UiPath Studio, to identify any of the user interface elements with the help of address and attributes, we call them selectors. A selector is an XML fragment. It has the address and the attributes of the element that needs to be highlighted or clicked or select from the drop down. So that is where selectors come in picture. How does a selector look like? So on the screen we are seeing this is how a typical selector looks like. So let us see in UiPath Studio whatever we have. We are going through the definition. Okay, so let me jump to my UiPath Studio. I have a plain sequence open in front of me and a notepad application. Okay, so I have a notepad application, and assuming that I have to click on this file button, right? So this application is open in front of me. So now what I want to do, I want to click somewhere, right? So I will definitely go ahead and take a click activity. So I take a click activity, mouse click, drag and drop, and then it says indicate on the screen. It is asking me where you want to click, right? So if I go to the properties now, you will see we do not have anything called, I will expand the target, we don't have the selector, right? This is blank because as of now UiPath does not know where to click. But as soon as I indicate it on the screen and I tell it to click on this file button, so what would happen, right? If I go to the properties now, we would have something called a selector, and that property is automatically set by UiPath for us, right? So that is nothing but the selector. If I just open the selector, it is nothing but the address. So it is asking us to create on the notepad.exe, where the title is config.txt and .notepad. This is the title. The menu bar, the index is the one, the name of the application, and you have to click on the file from the menu item. So this is an complete, you can relate this to an address, the way the postman delivers to the address. So now whenever this click activity is getting executed in UiPath Studio, it will ask the properties, it will ask UiPath Studio that where exactly I should click. So it will tell, go to the selector, find the selector on the screen and click it, right? So if I now again go back to my slide, you will see selectors are automatically generated every time we interact with the GUI elements, right? So that not only applicable to the click. So for example, what happens, I want to type something in this notepad, right? So what I will do is I will take a type into activity. So I will go here and type into activity, drag and drop it here. Now if I again go back to the properties, same concept, selector is not available, I click here, indicate on screen, and I want to type something here, right? So as soon as I click here, so you will notice something, this, the name of the text automatically changes, that this activity is clicking on the menu file item, this name is automatically generated. Now if I go back to the properties, same concept, the selector is now available. But now if you will see here, in the previously it was telling us to click on the save, but now it is telling us to write something on the editable text, right? So wherever we click and indicate or we interact with the UI elements, a selector is automatically generated, right? So now you can think of where exactly the selector, where else can the selector be, right? So for example, I have to assuming that I have to select some item from the drop down. Okay, so I would have called select item, right? So I will just drag and drop it here. So now if I go to the properties, you will see it is also having a selector, because we have to select something from the screen. So it would ask us from where should I select and which item to select, right? That's why it is having a selector. Which activities do not have selectors? For example, if I ask the UiPath to write a line, okay, so the write line will be happening in the console itself. So whatever we give the statement here, so I type here selector demo, so this will be directly printed here, right? So that does not require any of the UI interaction. So if I go to the properties, it is not having any selector. Similarly, there are a lot of activity, for example the assign activity, the add data row activity. So this, what is add data row? This is just adding then data row in the data table. So that does not require any UI interaction, everything happens on the background, right? So we do not have any property called selectors. So you will find selector property wherever you are interacting with a graphical user interface. Now if I just read it again, it's enable us to identify the elements through the address and the attribute stored as an XML fragment. So this is an example. Now let us see some more about the selectors. So this is, I hope now you understand how this thing is generated. Whenever we click on any item or we select any of the interaction with the GUI, the selector is automatically generated by the UiPath. Now what is this selector? Let us go drill down into the selectors. So the first one is called the root node, and the last one is the actual identifier. So what exactly I mean by a root node and an actual identifier? So if I go back to the selector of the notepad, right? So if I just open, you will see the first line is always notepad.exe and the title. So what does this mean? This is the root of the root node of the selector. That means that this indicate the exact application where we have to interact. And then you can think of a notepad as a big container notepad, then there is a menu item, and then there is file inside it. So the selector is similarly like notepad, then a menu bar, then a file. In the next selector, we told UiPath to type something into the editable text. So if I go here, you will see this thing is same because the container is same. Then we have something called text editor, and then inside we have something called the editable text. So what exactly a selector is? This is the correct thing that it needs to interact with, and this is called the actual identifier. So the last line will be the actual identifier where the automation will take place. But to reach to this actual identifier, we should have the parent classes or the root node we call, and then the other containers as well. So that is why in a selector the first line is called the root node and the last line is called the actual identifier. Let's proceed. Now let us drill down to the selector more. So selectors are made of nodes. So I hope now you understand node. So this is a node 1. So the first line is node 1, node 2, node 3. That's why selectors are made up of nodes. UI interfaces are built with a series of container nested one inside the other. So the like we are seeing like notepad, then a file menu, and then something else, right? So it's a nothing but a container, one inside the other and the other. That's why the last line is called the actual identifier, the upper line is called the upper lines are called the successive parents, and the first line is called the root node, right? So now this line is the actual identifier, this is the parent, and these are called the successive parents. Now that we understand how the selectors are actually made, let's see what are tags and attributes. Okay, so now this is one node. So every selector, in every selector there are nodes, and every node is made up of tags and attributes. So this is one node which is available in front of me. So in this screen, the WND is called a tag that will identify, that will let UiPath know, Studio know that you are dealing with a Windows, right? Similarly, whenever we are dealing with a HTML web page, or for that matter a web application or a web page, this WND will be replaced by HTML, then the tag will be HTML, and that's how UiPath will know that okay, we are dealing with an HTML application. Similarly for a control, web control, and the Java. So whenever, so as of now I was dealing with a Windows application, that was notepad, that's why it's coming as window. So that is nothing called a tag. So now every selector, every line is called a node. The node is made up of tags and attributes. How the tags can differentiate, it depends on the type of application you are interacting in the GUI. Now going to the next part, what are attributes? So this is the tag, and everything behind, that is following the tag, are the attributes. So if you'll just try to understand this thing, we are telling to open a application where the tag is Windows, the app name of the application is notepad.exe, and this is the class. So these are the attributes that uniquely identifies the element. So this is how the tags and attributes are differentiating in terms of selector. Just to repeat, every selector is made up of node 1, 2, 3, 4. Every node has tags and attributes. Tags define the type of the application you are interacting in the GUI, and then there are something attributes that help us to uniquely define the selector. Now I hope you understand the concept of selectors and why they are important, and how they are generated and why they are important. What is the difference between tags and the attributes? Now let us see what exactly are the reliable and the not reliable selectors. So before directly jumping into the PPT, I would like to go to the UiPath Studio and show it with the help of a demonstration. So I will just delete this guy and delete this guy. So I will start from the beginning. So I have a notepad application in open in front of me. The name of the notepad is config.exe, and there is some text available. Okay, so let us see, I want to type something. So what I will do is I will go ahead and take an activity called type into, right? So now the similar concept, if I go to the properties, I would have nothing here, but since now I want to indicate on the screen, we will tell I want to type. UiPath will ask me where do you want to type. I will tell I want to type into the notepad. Now the next question it will ask is what you want to do. I want to type something called a text, so I will type the text here, selector demo, right? So now the error is gone. Now what should happen is whenever we run this automation, it should print the selector demo on the notepad. Okay, so let me go here and run the file. The bot is executing and it has printed selector demo on the screen, right? So it was pretty simple, right? So there was text and it has typed selector demo. Now if I go back here and run the file again, the notepad is open in front of me, the UiPath robot is executing, and it should type the selector demo again in the notepad file. Okay, so now if I go here, you will see it has typed the selector demo once again. Now what exactly is a reliable and a not reliable selector? So if I go here and if I go to the edit selector, you will see this selector is generated. Okay, so I will quickly open a notepad++, delete the existing things from here. let us try to copy this selector and analyze the selector, right? So what we are telling UiPath, so now I hope you understand this thing. These are the nodes and this is the actual element which it have to type. So it is asking, we are asking UiPath to type into notepad.exe. it is of the type cls is notepad and the title is config.txt.notepad. Now if I ask you, is this working fine, we will say yes, this is working fine. But what happens if we have to type this thing in another notepad? Now let's say I just close this config.txt and I open one more notepad file. So I open one more notepad file here. Now let us try to run the automation again. Okay, so I will go here and run the file. Now previously we had one file which was called config.txt available, but now we have opened one more notepad and the expectation is we are expecting UiPath to type the selector demo in this notepad. Now let us see, will it be able to type or not? Okay, so there is something called a timeout for the selector. By default it is 30 seconds. So whenever you specify a selector, the default timeout for the selector is 30 seconds. That means that in 30 seconds if it is able to get the selector, it will click, else it will give an exception. So if you are looking at the screen, we have got an exception which says type into editable text could not find the UI element, right, user interface element corresponding to this selector, right? It has searched, failed for the selector tag, this the closest matches are this, something on these lines, right? So it has given an exception to me. Okay, so now how can I rectify, and let us try to analyze this, right? So if I go ahead and take one more type into activity, okay, and I if point it to the new one, this one, so it would have generated its new selector. So this is a new one. Now if I just copy edit selector, I will copy this and I will paste it here. So this is for the old one and this is for the new one. So what is the difference you see, right? So the editable text is the same, right? Because the text editor is same, the successor parent is also same, but the only change is the title, because in the selector one the title is hard coded. When I say hard coded, it means that it is a part of the selector. That means whenever this automation is running, it will always expects a notepad with this title. For me, now the notepad is of untitled notepads, that's why it is not able to click, as simple as that, right? So it tried to go to this address, the UiPath Studio it went to this address, it was looking for a notepad, it got the notepad exe, then it started looking for a notepad where the title is config.txt, but now we don't have any title called notepad config.txt, that's why it broke. In the next there was something called untitled notepad, it was available, so it was able to click. So are these selector reliable? No, because the title is hard coded and this is not a generic selector, it is a specific thing, right? So that's why it is called a non-reliable selector, because it is always trying to click on this notepad. Now that depends on your automation. If you have always the need, go ahead, but as of now for our situation we want it to write on every notepad, so that's why this is not a reliable selector. Now let us see how can we convert a reliable not non-reliable selector to a reliable one. I will just delete one of those, okay, and I will just edit it. So now UiPath, this selector wizard, this has a very good feature which is called the validate. As of now, if this validate is crossed, that means it is not able to validate the element on the screen, right? Because why it is not able to validate? Because the config.txt notepad with this header is not available. Now I have two options, I can indicate it to the new UI element or I can repair the selector. So let us see how exactly the repair works. Let me just copy the old one here. Okay, so this was the old one. If I go here and repair and I point it to the new notepad, selector was updated to match the live element. Let us see what that means. Okay, I will just go ahead and copy this selector. I will paste it at the bottom of the existing one. Now let us try to analyze. So it has not made any change in the last line. The only change it has made, instead of the, okay, this is the old one, sorry, let me just copy and paste it again. Okay, now if you'll see, it has placed a star in the title, right? So that means, so there are two things in a selector. One is the question mark and the star. So we will look into that in a little while in the later tutorial. So as of now, just quickly, there are two things. One is the question mark and one is the star. So the question mark means it will replace a single character. It will replace a single character, and this means any. Okay, so what it has done now, it is asking the UiPath Studio to click on the notepad.exe, and the title should be anything followed by notepad. So if you will see, this was config.txt.notepad. Now our new notepad title was untitled notepad. So that's how UiPath automatically generated a selector for you by creating notepad, but it also put IDX in front of it. So I will talk about the IDX in a little while. So as of now, if I just hit OK and I go with the UiPath Studio, now I have something called untitled notepad available on my screen. If I go ahead and run the file, it's the UiPath robot is executing and it was able to type, right? So now if I change the name to, let's say, XYZ also, okay, so let me change this to XYZ also, save. Now here, now I have changed it to XYZ demo. Now the selector, it will match. Now you can see, if I just click on the validate and if I highlight, it is correctly identifying the notepad, right? Because we are using the selector which was automatically generated by the UiPath. I will close the extra notepad. Okay, now if I go here and I click on the edit selector and validate, it was able to validate. Now what happens if I change anything to the selector? Now let's say I want it to do anything with the, I want the star, that means anything, then we want a space, then we want a hyphen, and then line. Now let me put a P here. So as soon as I put a P, it changes to question mark. That means you want to UiPath to validate. Okay, let us validate, and it will break, right? Because it is not available. Remove it, validate it again, and that's how it work. And repair, you have already seen, right? Now is this a good selector? As of now, yes. If I have just updated to XYZ and I save it, and now if I go ahead and run the file, okay, it was again able to type. But now you will notice it has put something called the IDX here. We'll talk about IDX now. Okay, so now let me go back to my presentation. So we have two type of selector, reliable and the not reliable. Reliable one, where the selector is reliable and that can accommodate to the change. So if you will see in the first one, sorry, in the first line, this is something called the title. That means this is not a reliable selector, and this is also a not reliable selector because it has an item called IDX, right? So as per UiPath recommendation, we should omit the use of IDX. Why that is so? Because what is IDX? IDX is the index of the current element, okay, it has within the container, which include the multiple similar elements, right? So now UiPath is identifying based on the number of containers it is having. So it has put an IDX of 3. For example, it is asking that click on the notepad.exe wherever the index is 3. Now what happens if the index change, right? The index might change. So that's why it is always recommended to replace the IDX with the more reliable one, so automation does not fail in case of the application is updated or the indices are changed. Now that is the same thing, if the index is tomorrow changed to 2 or 1 or 4 or 6 or 7, this automation will fail. So now if I just go back to my again to the selector demo, and if I see this, so there is an IDX already added, right? So now let us see how can I get rid of the IDX from this one. So I will just go here and I will delete this IDX. Now this is now in yellow. I click on validate and the selector is still valid. How can I validate? I can click on the highlight button and this highlights, that means it is going to type correctly. So that's why we always say that IDX is not recommended. What else I can do? Tomorrow something might happen and this notepad or this space may also cause a problem, right? So what I will do is I will just delete everything from here and I will click notepad. So what does that mean? That means that every notepad application, whatever the title is be, let it be any title. If you find a text editor, editable text, type something. Okay, now let us see that in action. So I have this XYZ, let me change it to ABCD, a new title, right? Save, go here, and I run the file. So now UiPath was able to successfully type to the abcd.txt also, right? So that's how the selector works, and that is the difference between a reliable and a not reliable selector. How this selector will be non-reliable? If I put something in the title that is very more generic. So let's say if I type here abcd, if I validate, now it's not working because A is capital. So I will type here abcd, validate. Okay, it's still not working. ABCD. Okay, let me put a star also here and validate. Okay, so because in front of ABCD there is a star. Okay, so now if I validate, this selector will only and only work for this notepad. As soon as I click on a new as soon as I click a new notepad, this selector will fail. And if I go here, edit the selector, validate, it is not able to validate. Now I have option to repair it, indicate it again, and then all the things. So that is the difference between a reliable and a non-reliable selector in UiPath Studio. Again, to come back, we should avoid using of indexes. Reason being, the IDX are the current element that it is within the container that has multiple similar elements. So it is recommended to replace the IDX with the more reliable one. Okay, so I will wrap this video here. Let's have a quick recap. In this video, we have seen what are selectors, how the selectors are made, what are tags and attribute in selector. We have seen what is a reliable and a non-reliable selector, and how can we omit the IDX, and why not to use the IDX in the selector. And all of this we have seen with the step-by-step demonstration in UiPath Studio. In the coming part of the video, we will be seeing more concept on the selector with UiPath Studio, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please do subscribe to the channel, and happy automation.